In today's episode, I speak with Andrew Quercia, a senior commercial sales manager at TD Bank. Andrew is a career banker, having spent over 16 years with TD, starting out as a bank teller and moving up the ranks to lead a middle market team of bankers focused on financing middle market transactions in the Greater Toronto Area. In this session, we talk about a wide range of topics, diving into Andrew's transition from retail to commercial banking early on in his career, how he built up a book of business early on, and his experience working in a credit solutions role. We also discuss his views on becoming a manager and leading a team of successful commercial bankers. And Andrew references a quote which I absolutely loved, comparing one's management approach to the differences between a travel agent and a tour guide. You will have to listen to the podcast to hear the full story on that one. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Andrew Quercia, Senior Manager at TD Bank. Welcome to the Inside Commercial Banking Podcast. This podcast is for commercial bankers that are in the business of lending money. My mission is to empower the commercial banking community by sharing best practices and the secrets to success through interviews with rainmakers and deal makers in the sector to help you fast track your career and achieve long-term success. My name is Robert Bezede, and I started my career in the commercial banking sector. Today, I'm a middle market M&A advisor helping Canadian companies sell. Thank you for listening to this podcast, and be sure to check out my YouTube channel, Finance Kid, for more content on commercial banking and M&A related topics. So let's jump into today's episode. Andrew, welcome. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great, Robert. How are you?
Fantastic. I'm really excited to interview you. I had the good fortune of being invited to the economic event you threw last month, and that was really good. And it's funny, I was sitting in the back of the room and I was talking to a couple other very experienced bankers, and everyone said the same thing, which is this guy's a rising star. So I'm really excited to sit here and ask you a couple questions about your career and your journey to where you're at today. So thanks for making the time, Andrew.
Thank you for having me, Robert. It's a pleasure and humbling to hear those comments. So it's great to hear and very humbling.
I say it on every single podcast that I do here. One of my favorite expressions is it takes 10 years to be an overnight success. And you've been doing this for over 16 years, and it's starting to show your experience and your breadth of experience. So we're going to cover all of that in this session. So I'd love to start off by maybe just understanding what you do today. Tell us a little bit about your role today. What does a day-to-day look like for you, just so that we can help the listeners understand where you're at in your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. My title is a senior manager of commercial sales. I'm based out of our Vaughan office. Just call it right at the north tip of Toronto. Literally, Steeles Avenue separates us from the north side of Steeles, separates us from Toronto and Vaughan. So Keelan Steeles, been here about a year. And what the role entails basically is leading a team of our, call it mid to upper market relationship managers. Every bank, these are obviously client facing roles, but every bank calls them a little differently. Like some banks refer to them as like senior commercial account managers, some refer to them as directors. But at the end of the day, these are our team of individuals that are the face of the bank for business banking customers at TD.
Nice. And then is there a certain size that you focus on? Is it really upper middle market? What would be the average size of customer you're targeting?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways we look at complexity. Again, these being the more kind of senior deal teams within the commercial bank at TD. Generally, from a revenue perspective, you're looking, it's quite a broad range too. You're generally looking at companies, say, with, call it 20 to upwards of 60, $70 million on average.
Yeah. And then in terms of the size, how big is a team today?
So I've got six folks that report directly to me, six of these relationship managers. But our office here in Vaughan is definitely one of the larger ones in the GTA. We've got about 50 full-time employees that work here. And any given commercial banking center at TD, you've got a combination of account managers, relationship managers, credit analysts who work alongside the relationship managers, our support staff, which is obviously super important to what we do. Those would be our treasury folks and cash management, as well as our client service officers who do the kind of day-to-day account servicing, as well as our management team, right? Our credit managers and our unit leader.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. And so you have 16 years of experience. So that's a lot. And you've seen a lot of different areas within the bank. So maybe before we go back to this role, I'd love to go right to the beginning and understand, how did you get into commercial banking? Like, what was your kind of big break, or how did you figure out that this was the path for you in your career?
Yeah, it definitely, like a lot of folks, it definitely didn't happen, say, in a straight line. It wasn't like something that I rolled out of bed one day and said, hey, I really like this. I want to do it. I come from a family of bankers, a long line of bankers. So I was a teller through university. It was a great job. I picked up all the crummy shifts that nobody
Yeah.
wants to do. But as a starving student, you're more than happy to work over the holidays and those types of things. So it was a great job for that. Really, that if you think about it, that was the start of my banking career, my interest in business banking, because obviously being on the front line, you'd service all types of clients. You service your individuals who'd come in for their banking, but it was always the business customers that had more complicated needs. That was, again, challenging and interesting to talk to them. They always had a lot to talk about. And a lot of them were recurring clients. So you'd see them more often than once. You build rapport, you develop relationship, you get to know them and their business a little more and their story, right? I come from, I mentioned a line of bankers, but also my grandfather started a company when he came to Canada in the 1950s. So I got to see firsthand how business has basically grown from the ground up. So I grew up in an entrepreneurial family that also happened to have a lot of bankers. Naturally, I found my way to this, right? So I do remember going along with my grandfather to the bank at the time. Fortunately, he didn't bank with TD at that time, but just going along with him to do deposits and stuff like that, it also piqued my interest in banking. I had a mentor at the time. I was coming out of university, and like a lot of folks didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to stay in banking, I just didn't know where. And she had mentioned to me at the time, hey, you come from an entrepreneurial family, why don't you look into commercial banking? And so obviously started looking down that path, job shadows. This is going back, I'd say almost 13 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's so it was the mentor that I had at the time who had obviously knew me and knew my family and said, hey, you might want to look into this. I think you would like it. And I did. And it turns out I did like it.
So I'd love to double click just on your first leg of the journey, which is that kind of branch level role. It's a very common role that's how you break into banking. It's usually what students and university students get into. Well, in that role, I'm curious, like what were some of the key lessons or skills that you learned that looking back now, there were the kind of the fundamental skills that you needed to have in any banking career. I'm just curious what you learned there.
The number one skill is definitely customer service, especially when I started in the bank was 2008, a terrible time for a
Mm,
lot of people, given the financial crisis at the time. A tough time to start working for a bank as well. A lot of people were stressed, on edge. So just being able to service them and understand what their needs are and just connect with them on a deeper level. Being on a teller line, it's hard to make connections because a lot of folks want to get in and get out and do
yeah.
their transaction. They don't want to wait in line. But a lot of tellers have strong customer service goals that they have to uphold. Customer service and relationship, like I would call it relationship and connecting with clients is so important. And that's where I learned the importance of it. Whether you're doing due diligence around a transaction, you're trying to better understand a transaction from call it
Mhm.
a risk perspective, whether you're trying to offer advice on a product or service, having a relationship with them and some underlying trust and servicing them well, which is the start of all of that, is generally what I learned early
And,
days.
and is it just experience in terms of learning how to ask the right questions, or was there anything that you did that allowed you to better build relationships? Like, I'm curious.
But it's funny, articulated so eloquently now, but if I look back to that time, I didn't realize what it was. It's like looking back and understanding, hey, we call it customer service, but at the end of the day, you're building relationships with the customers as they were coming in, you were servicing them. And to your point, yeah, it does involve asking questions. I've always been a curious person. I love to understand people's stories, etc. Sometimes a lot of things start with small talk, right? Somebody comes in front of you and say, hey, I'm paying my bell bill, and it descends into a conversation about something completely different than
Yeah.
that, right? So sometimes it's just taking what seems benign and just probing a little further. It's also reading the room, right? Like occasionally, when I was a teller, for example, you get somebody super busy that they don't want to talk, and you just got to service them well and let them go on with their day. But the next time they come back, they'll remember, hey, this guy was really quick. And maybe if then they have some more time to talk to you or get to know you, then they'll take
Yeah.
advantage of that.
It's a very common theme that I hear a lot of people say is that it's that intent and that interest to go one step further beyond just the day-to-day transactional element to understand why that customer is doing what they're doing. And
Yeah.
then that allows you to build that relationship, right? So it sounds like you had an interest probably from your banking family. You could connect to those customers a lot better as well, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And so another question is not to almost like the bottom of the pyramid, which is that entry level role. There's a lot of tellers, right? Because there's a lot of branches. And
Yeah.
so when you talk about finding a mentor, again, that's a very common theme I hear a lot of successful bankers have is they have that person that believed in them or really gave them that additional time to teach them. So how would you recommend someone that's coming into the bank today, doesn't really have relationships? How do you recommend the approach finding a mentor in the bank?
I would say using the same skills that I described, just first and foremost, just connecting with people, right? What I've always loved about TD and the culture that we have at TD is it's always been very collaborative and very colleague friendly. And I've never in all of my, call it 16 and a half, 17 years almost, had any issues with connecting or reaching out to anyone. People are more than willing to help aspiring bankers or bankers who are looking to advance their career in some way, find some time, especially now in the digital age that we're in. If it's a quick Zoom call or Microsoft Teams chat, people generally have time. They'll find time by virtue of you reaching out and showing interest. So finding common ground to finding things in common that you can connect and relate with people about. Again, another thing that TD does is excellent about is focused areas around different cultural groups and whatnot, where you can connect on that basis as well. So there's a lot of these different support and networking groups within TD
Yeah.
that you can connect with and find mentors and find people who've charted a path. And if you see that their path is something that you'd be interested in, you can definitely connect with them.
Yeah, it sounds like you got to put yourself out there, which I know it's a little
Yeah.
scary, especially coming from a student where you're in your books, you're grinding on what's in front of you. You need to be a bit more strategic to say, hey, I'm going to stretch my comfort zone and actually reach out to people. And maybe they'll say no, but as well, there's probably a lot of people that'll say yes to try to give you some time and to help you along in your career, right? So,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like I can honestly go back and say I've never had a no, right? And I think it depends on how you approach people too. If you show them that you've done a little bit of research
mm,
or there's something in particular that interests you about their career path that you like to talk about, it's easy. A lot of folks get a lot of coffee chat requests, and if it's a bit of a generic reach out, you can tell. But if somebody reaches out and it's very specific and there's something specifically they want to talk to you about, that generally piques people's interest and they see that you've done some research or looking into their story, and therefore they may be more interested in connecting with you.
So going back to the climb, so you're at the branch level, you have a mentor. That mentor really puts you onto the commercial banking path. You then transition into commercial banking. I'm curious, what was the biggest learning gap moving from the branch level to more of a commercial business banking type role?
Yeah, and you know what, it was a huge learning curve. The associate program at TD does an excellent job of giving you kind of the tools and resources to learn quickly. And it is a mentorship based training and associate program where you do have, say, a more senior banker that's affiliated with you that you're learning from, right? So it is a well supported training and development role. One of the biggest elements of that is the understanding of the risk culture and lending and how to lend, right? In school, you look at a lot of theoretical accounting, say if you've done a few accounting courses, but it's different looking at financial statements from the perspective of a lender, right?
Mhm.
And being able to, I had the benefit of going to Western, although I wasn't part of the Ivy program. I was able to do some of their early courses, and they're well known for the case studies. Getting into commercial banking was like live case studies every day. So you're working on these real businesses that have a real need or something that needs to be addressed, whether it's a credit or cash management product. And you basically have to make an assessment of what it is that they need and how does that fit the products or services that we offer and make a recommendation. So it was learning, call it the ability to analyze the situation quickly, thoroughly, and then make a recommendation. We always talk about the power of your recommendation. And that's really, as a banker, what you get critiqued on. How strong was your recommendation? Did you well inform yourself? Did you pull in all the resources available
Yeah.
to you, whether it's through your peers, et cetera? Having that shift, right, where you're in school and you're always just looking for the right answer, to going to a real life, call it case study, where there really aren't any, call it right or wrong answers, just a lot of well-formed recommendations.
Yeah, said. And there is no, it's not a clear yes, no. Like some banks will arrive at a no, and some banks will arrive at a yes. It's just their view of risk. How do you think about risk at a very basic level? When you look at a company, what are some of the things that you zero in on beyond the standard five C's of credit and all the stuff that you read in the textbooks? Like, what's the stuff that you've learned in the trenches that are like, wow, this really what I'm looking out for? These are the questions I'm asking for.
Yeah, a lot of it, a lot of lenders, I'm sure you'll talk to a lot of lenders over time and they'll talk to you about the gut instinct, right? And that's really just a byproduct of years of meeting with clients, looking at financial statements. What I always tell newer bankers is nothing can replace a meeting where you're sitting across from a client or prospective borrower and you're walking their plant floor, you're walking their shop floor, you're getting a feel for the business, you're understanding. And I would always challenge myself and our bankers to try to think of the business and the product and the services and how they make money in a simple way as possible. There's a lot of complicated businesses out there in the tech space. I've done tech lending, et cetera. Your ability to simplify and distill and truly understand the risks sometimes or what will guide you from a risk management perspective, right? So sure, there's all the technical, can you calculate this? Can you calculate that? Right. But it's that developing that gut feel for lending, and a lot of that is and cannot be replaced by having a client meeting or having a meeting with a prospective borrowing customer and having a feel and a see for their business, right?
And maybe just going back to your younger self, what's the common things that younger bankers overlook when they're assessing credit or assessing that relationship? I'm curious what's your view on that?
I would say it's definitely not intentional. It would involve like character. If you think about those five C's, right, or the three C's, like
Yeah.
it's the character, right? And again, character is always a tough one for lenders to pin down because it's not always obvious from the get-go. Like sometimes it takes tough situations to see what a borrower's character looks like truly, right? It's not something you can assess. Now, sure, there's always signs on a statement or things that could guide you in one way or another. The other thing is it's super subjective, right? So what's one person may think is not a great character
Yeah.
situation, another one may not think it's so bad, and a lot of that's based on people's like lived experiences and whatnot. Generally we come to a common ground when if you assess these things, that it's tough to develop that instinct. It takes time and it takes a lot of meetings and a lot of experience.
Yeah, and I love that you touched on that because that's probably one of the most rewarding things about a career in commercial banking is you're constantly in front of business owners, you're constantly interacting with customers, and so
Yeah.
you build that kind of sniffer dog ability to really sense the good people from the bad versus being just behind the numbers and only reading the story through the numbers. That's going to tell you half the story and probably even less than half of the story. You're going to learn out more like through those site visits, as you said, right?
Yeah, you meet so many. That's one of the things I love about what I do is just the stories you hear, and it starts with kind of what we said, curiosity, just hearing people's. And a lot of business owners have rich histories in terms of how they got started. A lot of these are family companies that have grown over the years. A lot of them have been family companies that say maybe imploded and then went their separate ways. It's always interesting to hear stories and success stories and stories of challenges or maybe even failures and how they had to pivot, et cetera.
Yeah. Okay. So going back then to so you've gotten into commercial banking, and what ends up happening is in the early days, you're more focused on the execution side of managing credit, managing the annual reviews,
Yeah.
going through the day-to-day more transactional items. But over time, you get elevated towards a more customer-facing origination role. And the technical stuff is oftentimes learned and taught well by the banks. I think one area where it's a bit of a leap is really how do you move from executor to originator and how do you source business? So I'd love to go dig into that. Like, how was that experience for you in that first originator role? What were some of the lessons you learned, some of the mistakes that you made?
It definitely. So what I say to a lot of the kind of newer bankers too is don't underestimate the power of leadership in any of these roles, right? You don't have to be the CEO of a company to be a leader, right? And if you think about the fundamentals of good leadership, it starts with two things like trust and credibility, right? So when you start out in a client facing role, you've got a portfolio of clients, right? And these are tremendous opportunities to connect with obviously well-established businesses, but it's important that you do what you say you're going to do. And so when a customer has a request, you got to service them well. That will create opportunities for reciprocal business, right? If you serve customers well, they'll refer you to other companies that they know, friends, families, et cetera. Right. And again, that kind of goes back to what I talked about earlier, like customer service, right? So if you have the credibility to do what you say you're going to do for customers, it builds trust, right?
Yeah.
And then I always tell people we are in the trust business, right? Our clients, our partners that refer us business, they need to trust us to be able to execute for them, right? They need something, and these are important roles in the sense that they support these businesses in our local economies, right? You as this individual's banker, they're relying on you for whether it's growth capital, working capital financing, an acquisition, et cetera. They're really relying on you, and never underestimate how much you know about them and their history and their company, that you're the one that's able to service them the best, right? Building on those key leadership fundamentals are what really drives this momentum that will reward you with more kind of business opportunities. In a sense, I'm describing what eventually becomes your reputation, right? So the stronger you build up your reputation, people know who you are, they want to deal with you, right?
Hmm. And you can't rush that. Like in a way, you can't land in that role. And that's sometimes what I see with younger bankers is they have really high expectations of, oh, I'm going to get my first deal in 3 months or 6 months, and that's going to be my sole origin, like my first. And that's not how it works, right? Like at the end of the day, leads may come quickly, but they also may come slowly. But you can't forget the
Yeah.
fundamentals,
I,
right?
I've had again, one of the many privileges I've had in my career is working with a lot of amazing leaders, amazing executives and leaders. And you can tell generally an executive will have over 20 years of bank experience, and you can tell the network that they have is so robust, right? And it's a product of having built a reputation, such a strong reputation over many years, that it almost becomes like clockwork. We joke internally, some of the best business developers later in their career just pick up their phone because they don't have to go out there and knock on doors and find business that way, because their reputation has so much momentum and weight behind it that people call them, right? I've seen that with a lot of the senior leaders I've worked with over the years. And I think that's the utopia for a lot of bankers and call it business development roles.
Oh, I remember being a junior banker looking at that and like wishing, oh, I wish I was in that position. But again, it's time, right? It takes 10, 20 years to get to that level. And I'll share just a little bit of my experience. So I would say the one thing I didn't do a good job when I was at Roynat of really mining and spending time with the existing customers because I was so focused on new relationships that I was really not spending as much time building the same quality type of relationship with existing customers. They can be your referral sources too. You don't have to go outside the bank. You can just stay
Yeah.
in the bank and just do a good job servicing those customers.
It boils down to like time is finite too. You know, in a year, you have to accomplish so much, right? You have to accomplish so much to have success in that year. So it really begs the question. Sure, there's a lot of activities you can do, but again, one of the key activities you want to do is you don't want to grow a portfolio and potentially neglect your current clients, and then you're creating a lot of churn on your own book. So you're not really growing on a net basis, right? So it really starts with taking care of your customers, right? And then from there, you can grow. Again, once you like, trust works in so many beneficial ways, right? If customers know you, they trust you've done good work, you also get more leeway from them, right? So if you need a little bit more time sometimes to look at a request, and that's time that you're using to be out prospecting or finding new business, you now have that ability to do that because you've built up some trust with your client base, right? Or with your team. That obviously, generally in banking, it's never a one person show. You've got a lot of team members supporting you and supporting your client portfolio.
And so when you look at, and even now when you're hiring relationship managers, but even going back to your time when you were in that RM role, what are the three key skills that you see, common skills that you see successful relationship managers have? What would those be?
So I go back to what I talked about earlier when I mentioned things like credibility and trust, right? And credibility is so many things, right? It's work ethic, right? It's, like I said, doing what you say you're going to do, right? It's a track record of success, right? So if whatever you've done, whether they're entry level kind of junior roles, can you point to a track record of success where you had to go above and beyond to deliver, right? And Because these are called relationship managers are leadership roles, we do look for a lot of leadership elements in these individuals, right? Can they lead a team? Are they organized? Do they have good communication, right? Do they connect well with customers? Being a more senior role in the bank, generally when somebody comes into a relationship manager role, they'll have done some level of client facing role before that, whether it's a more junior account manager, an analyst. So they have some level of comfort and exposure to clients and a track record. Those are just some of the things I would say we look at.
And at the end of the day, it's no different in our business in the M&A world. Execution trumps everything. If you're not
Yeah.
willing to put in the work and actually go and do the job and do it consistently and show up every day, then you're not going to build a business, right? At the end of the
Yeah.
day, that's half the battle right there. Just executing.
Yeah. You need a lot of grit and tenacity. Like, in my opinion, it's not unique to say just relationship. Like in anything in life, you need a lot of grit and tenacity, and you need to be motivated, right? Motivated to developing business takes a lot of discretionary effort, right? There's a lot of, we
Mhm.
call it evening networking events. There's a lot of after hour phone calls with customers, right? These types of roles require big commitment, right? Those that kind of want to advance and move up, and it's a good opportunity for that. I've worked different roles through my life where maybe you didn't have that kind of an opportunity by virtue of the nature of the role. Maybe it's more technical, where there wasn't as much opportunity to give discretionary effort. If it's widget based type work, you do your 20 tasks a day and that's it. There's not really a ton of opportunity to do more. These roles, the sky is the limit in terms of how much you want to do to build success for yourself and the company you're working for.
So changing gears, and this is something that I think in an alternate life, I would have absolutely loved to take. I've taken my career into that commercial credit management role because that's something that I've seen the client-facing side, the more sales. I am a sales type person, but really credit's a completely different game. And what you did is as you climbed up the ranks on the client-facing side, you were a relationship manager. You then went and did a stint in action credit management. So talk to us about that experience. What was that role like? And I'm curious, how was it different between the two? What are the primary differences?
Yeah. So what I would say in the line of business that I'm in, I would say the credit role is super important, because at the end of the day, using to service our customers these credit and loan products, you have to know the inner workings, not only of the product, but how the product's assessed and what situations they're applicable to or not applicable to, or how you structure a deal. So I would say it's necessary, right? Like the credit knowledge, you start your commercial banking career in a training development role geared towards understanding how to lend and understanding the credit products. You then go into a more junior account manager role where you're starting to deploy some of these products and
Execute.
analysis strategies. Yeah, execute, right? As a credit manager, again, I'll go back to that power of the recommendation. The credit manager role, you're really, call it one more line of defense before a file goes to risk management. So it's incumbent on you and your whole team, but you're the credit coach of that team. You have a good sense of what the parameters are that the bank would be comfortable in a deal, but not just that, you've got to have a good sense of the parameters of the market, right? So you can't just swing the pendulum one way and go totally conservative. You'll never win a deal, right? It's a unique role in that regard. And a lot of risk managers will share that sentiment, right? Around, you can't just focus on the technical and this. You've got to find some flex and some common ground, but within the bank's appetite. And sometimes that end zone is razor thin. That perfect kind of landing spot is tough to find, but that is a role that basically hones that ability, right? Like it hones the ability to really assess, how far could you push, or is this a situation that requires being a little more conservative, right? Because that maybe it's an industry or a situation that other banks wouldn't be so keen to jump in and lend to. So it's a great role in that regard. You learn all that, but again, you're coaching your team to look for this stuff too. So it's not just about you and your ability as a credit manager, but it's about building kind of the next generation of better business bankers who are deploying good intellectual curiosity, critiquing deals, but structuring them in such a way that they're still palatable, or there's still a deal that you're able to execute on for the bank and for the customer.
And so I'm sure there are common themes in terms of things that the banker would push on and you would either push back on or filter or pivot a little bit. What were some of the things in deals that you'd look at and say, ooh, like I would change that. Like how can a banker interact with a credit manager in a more productive, efficient way? Well, what are some of those things?
I would say it goes back to a lot of the common themes I talked about. It's credibility too, right? I
Yeah.
remember when I started my career, one of my early credit managers, this fellow he was a very experienced banker, right? Very experienced, deep knowledge, deep institutional knowledge, right? And if you think about it this way, I'm a rookie banker who really doesn't know much, right? So
Hmm.
it's a David and a Goliath, right? But
Yeah.
from a knowledge perspective, right? You're going up against a Goliath, right? So you need to prepare, right? Prepare, do as much diligence and research as you can, because when that individual who has more experience than you, and again, in most companies, people in management roles generally have more banking experience, and you're trying to get to that level, you need to do the prep work, right? It's just, I'll use sports. Everybody loves sports analogies, right? Like if you're going to go and play basketball against LeBron James and you're a rookie, like you're not going to, talent will only get you so far. It's the prep and the practice and all that to
Yeah.
gain the respect of a LeBron James. That's how I approached it early in my career, is the people you're working with have such deep and strong knowledge. What's stopping you from working hard to try to inform yourself as best you can so that you make a really solid recommendation that earns people's respect? And ultimately, that's how you do climb the ranks, is you start to build this respect from the folks around you, and they say, hey, this person knows what they're talking about. This person works hard, right? They work hard, they put in the time, they put in the effort. There is no shortcut. At least that's what I've learned in my 16 years. There really is no way to shortcut that.
I agree. Just a different way to retell that because it's funny, like everyone I interview, I see the similarities because I think a lot of people walk the same path or very similar path. And someone once told me it's not the first level thinking, it's the secondary level thinking and the third, where you go deeper and deeper into a file and you really truly understand that credit. That comes with experience, but also comes with being able to communicate that well to the credit team. And so once you think beyond the primary level and you go deeper, then that you build that reputation and that trust with credit that, okay, you know what, I don't have to, I guess, be as hard on you or push you as much because I see that you're doing the work and you're thinking beyond just the primary level.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's part of the momentum that will build in your favor. And like anything, it's something that you have to uphold over time. So it's never like a one and done. Hey, I did really good due diligence on this one deal, and so now I can snooze for the next two, right? You're still doing that
Yeah.
because, again, it takes a long time to build it up, but it's something that can evaporate pretty quickly with a few bad or errors in judgment or whatnot.
So I'm just maybe a little tangent here, but how do you develop and continue to keep your skills sharp? Obviously, there's the day-to-day job, there's the experience that comes with that, but how do you seek more to really separate yourself and become better at that secondary level thinking and beyond?
For me, it's always been about repetition. The more you see, the more you do, and the more often you do these things, that you'll develop an expertise. Like I do believe in that 10,000 hour rule from Malcolm Gladwell, right? Outliers. Like I do believe that you've got to develop this level of mastery. And again, just by looking at a bunch of files, you've gotten to a point in your career where if you become the go-to person for advice on structuring, and it's because you have this big database of deals or precedents that you can draw on, that's generally where you see that shift. And that's part of the knowledge transfer that needs to happen for the viability of any company to a new generation, right? You need to be able to transfer those skills and knowledge and to help your people develop that critical way of thinking, right?
Okay. And then what about just I'm curious because in that credit role, obviously there's when you're putting deals on the books, things are going well. But there are other
Yep.
times where maybe, things are not going so well. Businesses go through cycles, there's loan underperformance, or the credit is at risk. I think that's one area that a lot of younger bankers feel uncomfortable in because they've never been through it. So what advice or tips or more tactical tips can you offer in terms of a loan is starting to underperform? How do you manage that relationship? And
Yeah, I would say stay extremely close to your client. Trust shouldn't evaporate just because there's a tough situation that you're dealing with or that your customer is going through, that is actually an opportunity to further deepen trust through economic cycles, right? Being able to stay close to them to fully understand what's going on. Um, and then again, going back to the recommendation thing, right? So if you have a good, solid understanding, you can recommend some different course of action. And again, if you have trust with clients, generally it's received, right? If a customer understands where your position is as the bank, I learned a lot of lessons early in my career. And I remember I had one customer in particular who I was eager to please. I'll say that. I was very eager to please. They were throwing a lot of aggressive, call it requests at me, and I was being a bit of a yes man. And then at the end of it, the customer kind of said, "There's no way you can do any of that stuff." And the customer was right. The customer kind of called me on my bluff, but I was an inexperienced banker at the time. But it taught me a valuable lesson in that sometimes customers want to know what your position is. It doesn't always have to align with what they want. But again,
Mm.
as a banker that builds experience and credibility and trust and all these things, like you need to know what you can do for them, right? So if it is a risky situation, being able to tell them, hey, here's where we are, then they can manage and budget accordingly, right? So
Yeah. And that was funny you said that because I think that's the one thing that people forget is you are the internal advocate for that business owner inside the bank's ecosystem. So in a way, they're actually looking to you for guidance in terms of, especially in a time of uncertainty when there's underperformance. So if you don't know there's a tougher feedback, it's not that you should pull those punches, but you should deliver that and provide clarity at the end of the day. It's not about hiding, but it's more about clarity and just being firm with the bank's
yeah,
position, right? So,
yeah. Being firm but not inflexible, I would say. Businesses evolve rapidly, right? Macroeconomic situations change rapidly too, right? So it's being open, but giving clear guidance. Sometimes point in time as best as you can, based on well-informed opinions and based on research that's been done, et cetera. So, yeah.
okay. And so now moving towards the final chapter. So you've done the credit management role, and now you're moving towards really managing an excellent team. Like again, I've complimented you multiple times on this. You got a great team there, and a lot of that is due to you. But I would love to understand what was that kind of transition from being a player to a player coach and a coach? Like how did you manage that? Because that is a change in the day to day and the types of skills that you're doing using. So how was that experience for you?
Yeah, it's an amazing experience. People management, people leadership is extremely rewarding because at the end of the day, people are entrusting in you, their careers, their aspirations, sometimes their weaknesses and areas that they need to work on. So it's an incredible responsibility that is very rewarding when you help your team members achieve their goals and watch them advance their careers and progress. Right? It's just this team mentality, right? Like at the end of the day, everybody's on the same team. We're all working towards common goals. We all want to work hard for each other. You see it with, again, going back to the sports analogy, championship teams. Everybody wants to play on a championship team because they all want to win, right? I've always had the benefit of being surrounded by high octane team members who want to win. They obviously want to advance their career, et cetera. And generally, I would say commercial banking attracts these career driven, career focused people because of the way the role is structured, right? And the fact that these are performance driven roles, right? It's some good advice I got from one of my former leaders was, I love this analogy and I use it to this day. It's this notion around as leaders, you're meant to serve your people. And one of the analogies I like is this one of a tour guide. So the difference between a travel agent and a tour guide is a travel agent will tell you, hey, go here. They'll sit behind a desk and they'll tell you, hey, go here and do this. The tour guide is actually on the tour with you in the heat, in the dust, sand, etc.,
Yeah.
experiencing it with you and showing you what there is to see, right? And that's the leadership style I've gravitated towards is people want to be supported. They want to, be supported in the trenches when you're out there. So
I love that analogy. I've never heard that before, actually. That's really
yeah,
good.
yeah, it's not mine. I didn't come up with it. One of my previous VPs, that was his kind of his
Yeah.
advice to me.
So I'm curious when you think about the skills that made you a successful people leader, What are those skills in your eyes relative to what it took for you to succeed in more of a relationship management execution role when you're just scoring the points versus coaching the people who are scoring the points?
So, like in my honest opinion, there really is no difference between, call it, a relationship manager who's a successful leader and a sales manager who's a successful leader. As a relationship manager, you have to lead your team. Even when I was a relationship manager, I thought to myself, when I started out, I said, this is going to be tough. None of these people report to me, right? They're all the analyst on my team, the client services officer. They don't report to you. That being said, what I've learned as a manager is it really doesn't matter whether they report to you or not, right? It's about all those good things I talked about before: credibility, trust, respect, influence, right? And to your point about scoring the points, again, as a leader, I do feel that you do need to be able to score points too, right? You need to be able to show people, hey, you're good with clients. You need to show them that, hey, you're able to develop some business. Again, the caveat being, as a manager and as a leader, you should, in theory, be spending more time developing your people and building a system of success for them and strategies and reducing barriers to doing kind of good quality work. So it's more of a strategic level, less of a doer. But you still shouldn't neglect, in my opinion, the doer aspect of the leadership role. You still need to show your people that, hey, this is what I would do in this situation, et cetera. But then challenge them to replicate that or to find their own unique way forward.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice because you can't overcommit to one or the other. Some of the senior leaders above you, they still have a network and they still have a presence and customers still come to them. The way they execute on that work may be a little bit different now that they're juggling different responsibilities. But you still have
Yeah.
to invest in managing that network as well and not being out of the game.
Right. Like I've seen both types. I've seen managers and leaders who are more behind the desk and less out there. And that can be a challenge. But I've also seen the opposite where they're doing too much and
Mhm.
not focusing enough on strategy and team and culture and those types of things. So like anything in life, it requires a good balance to be struck. And sometimes you may have to lean more one way than the other way, but eventually being in the moment, being able to assess the situation and pivot accordingly is important too as a leader.
Well said. Okay. So last question. When you look at the younger commercial bankers today, and just generally as they're coming into the trade and they're climbing up in the early ranks, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see that they're making today, and how should they correct those mistakes?
I think everyone's career path is unique, right? And I wouldn't necessarily say folks are making mistakes. Sometimes the quote unquote mistakes are the biggest learning opportunities, right? I know some of the areas where maybe I made mistakes looking back. You may not realize it at the time, embrace it as it happens. It may be stressful in the moment, but you embrace it as it happens. Like the one thing looking back on my career is a lot of folks want to advance and progress quickly and whatnot, but there's like huge, immense value in becoming a master, like really mastering. And I always tell people you can't skip experience, right? I've also seen executives in the bank who've done very long stints as, call it, relationship managers or business development roles, but then they've progressed through the executive ranks very quickly too, because they had reached such a mastery level, right? Experience is experience, and it's something that takes time, and spending time in roles to develop that deep experience would only ever benefit. It would only ever benefit. I don't see a way that it wouldn't benefit, right? I think we get caught up a lot in these notions around, oh, every 2 years you got to change jobs and make your resume look really good, right? But sometimes those longer stints result in quicker progression later too, right?
And that is such a common thing is a lot of people are hungry for that next step. They're and in a way they're impatient and they're really not really enjoying or realizing on the full potential of the current role that they're in, which is just to
Yeah,
maximize their learning and their exposures. And as you said, the reps, because in this business, the reps are everything. The more reps you have, the more deals you can work on, the quicker you're going to accelerate through the ranks and become a strong leader, right?
exactly.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Andrew, this has been fantastic. Again, thank you. I know you're a very busy guy. Take for taking the time and sharing your experience. If someone wanted to reach out and just ask you a question or take you out for coffee and seek out that mentorship type relationship, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, best way would be my email. So it's my first name, Andrew, dot my last name, Quercia at TD.com.
Awesome. I'll put that information in the podcast link there. And again, thank you so much for your time, Andrew. I appreciate it and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Robert. You too. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Inside Commercial Banking podcast. I love creating this content and I hope that you found it helpful. Now, can I ask you to do one quick favor? It would help if you could share this episode with your colleagues and like and subscribe to the podcast. The more exposure we can get on social media, the more guests we can attract. I hope this podcast can be the go-to resource for aspiring commercial bankers and middle market professionals looking to learn and grow. So be sure to also check out the Finance Kid YouTube channel for more content on commercial banking and M&A in the middle market. Now, lastly, if you are based in Canada and you have a client that is interested in buying and or selling companies, I would love to connect with them. Please reach out to me over LinkedIn, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and have a wonderful day.